Hey everyone, today we're going to be debunking Trump's claims of him being a quote unquote peacekeeper and him deserving the Nobel Peace Prize. If anything, he deserves jail time for being a pedophile, a convicted felon, and a domestic terrorist, as well as a terrorist when it comes to foreign relations. We are going to be debunking his claims of mitigating over 6 wars. Let's just get into it. All the sources that I will be referencing throughout this video will be found in my description on YouTube, so if you want to go do your own research, I highly recommend, because I will only be able to touch on these conflicts a little bit because we only have 10 minutes. So first we're going to get into the strikes against Venezuela. Now this was a terrorist operation authorized by the president. According to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, Congress is the only power in government that can authorize war. The president's position as commander-in-chief only authorizes them to allow defensive strikes against an imminent threat. So a vessel or people that have actively struck the United States, meaning these strikes against Venezuela were unconstitutional because they were offensive strikes, meaning these people were not imminent threats to our country. Despite JD Vance's claims saying that we couldn't just send the Navy SEALs into these places, quote unquote, and arrest them and give them a proper criminal trial, if we can have the upper hand and bomb a boat, then we can sure as hell stop the boat with the Navy SEALs and give them a proper trial. And even if these boats were carrying drugs, that is not a basis to execute the people on the boat. That is basis. We don't even have authorization actually to search them because they were in Caribbean waters. They were not in US territory. And even if they were in Puerto Rico, these claims do not give our government the authorization to execute these people. Now we're going to get into the conflict between India and Pakistan. Now Trump is claiming to have mitigated this war on the consensus of a trade deal. However, he wasn't even sitting in during the bilateral agreement made between India and Pakistan. The only US officials sitting in during the conference, again, sitting in, not mediating it, were JD Vance and Marco Rubio. And according to Randir Jaswal, the spokesman for India's foreign ministry, when top officials from India and the United States did hold conversation during the conference, there was no talks of trade. And essentially what happened was there was a terrorist attack in India, and India accused Pakistan of being a part of the terrorist attack, so they bombed military infrastructure in Pakistan, and then Pakistan reached out to India asking for the ceasefire, which they came to bilaterally with no mediation from another nation. And since this ceasefire agreement was made, both nations have accused each other of violating the agreement. So that claim made by Trump has been debunked. Now we're going to get into the conflict between Congo and Rwanda. Now, essentially, the Rwanda-backed M23 proxy forces have been stealing Congolese resources with the help of the European Union and then selling them to public markets. And so Congo reached out to the United States through Aaron Pointon, a US businessman and lobbyist, who was tasked with setting up a conference so that Congo could offer the United States a minerals for security deal. This gives the United States access to untapped resources such as uranium, lithium, and cobalt, which is necessary for economic development. However, the only way I see this going good for Congo is if we help Congo become a more developed nation, instead of simply just exploiting them for their resources in exchange for giving them military backing. So there has been no peace mediated between Congo and Rwanda. This is simply a minerals for security deal. Now let's talk about the conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Now, this deal brokered by the United States between the two nations gives Azerbaijan, the United States, and Turkey unimpeded access through the heart of Armenia, through what they're calling the Zangezur corridor. Now, both former and current Armenian officials criticized the current prime minister of Armenia for selling out Armenia's sovereignty for short-term geopolitical gain. I'm going to quote this next line straight from the Armenian Weekly. The former prime minister of Armenia argued that in any serious understanding of statehood, no nation would concede unrestricted transit through its territory on a foreign power's terms and still claim to have preserved its sovereignty. Now, I'm just going to leave it there. You can go do your own research on this situation and educate yourself further. However, it's very clear that no peace has been reached, and Armenia's sovereignty was sold out by the current Prime Minister of Armenia for short-term geopolitical gain. Now let's get into the feud between Israel and Iran. President Trump authorized Israel to strike 3 separate nuclear facilities in Iran on the claims that these nuclear facilities were being used to create nuclear weapons. However, US officials have debunked these claims, and Iran has said that they simply use their nuclear facilities for civilian enrichment, which is very similar to how we here in the United States use our nuclear facilities. Now, although these two nations did come to a ceasefire agreement, the tensions between the nations still remain volatile, and the ceasefire agreement is very, very weak. And it's very clear that the United States would not be able to mediate peace between the two nations because right now the United States is an aggressor when it comes to this situation. Now we're going to move on to the conflict between Thailand and Cambodia. Now, although the two nations did reach a ceasefire agreement on the consensus of a trade deal brokered by the United States, both nations have accused each other of violating the ceasefire agreement. From an educated standpoint, it's very clear that Thailand is the aggressor in this situation, and this screams textbook settler colonialism. It's very clear that Cambodia does not want to escalate tensions between the two nations. However, it seems very clear to me that Thailand wants Cambodian land, wants Cambodian territory, and is displacing Cambodian citizens and just inciting violence against Cambodia. You can do more research on your own. However, from an educated standpoint, the situation remains very volatile and no peace has been reached. Now we're going to get into the feud between Egypt and Ethiopia. Now, this isn't even a war. Essentially, Ethiopia built a dam along the Nile River, which threatens Egypt's water security, and Trump has taken Egypt's side, both with this presidency and during his last term. And during his last term, he actually said we should bomb the dam, which is inciting violence, which is terrorism. And there's really nothing we can do in this situation other than take Egypt's side, and that's what Trump has done. However, it's still unclear what Trump is going to ask for in return for taking Egypt's side with this. But again, there's really nothing we can do to mediate tensions because one, Trump has been an aggressor in this situation, and two, this is not our situation to mediate. We can't do anything about this. We need to be focused on our own nation rather than these distractions that the Trump administration is trying to bring up. So there is another peace deal debunked. Now, as you have learned, Trump is the farthest thing from a peacekeeper and should not be the president of the United States.